Good morning. Welcome to the Sanders Report. It's been a busy first few weeks of this Trump administration and a lot going on. It's been a lot to try to keep up with, even for me. One of the big news articles this past week has been about USAID and Elon Musk and Doge going after USAID and what they're spending their money on. And I got to tell you, this is something that I'm actually excited about because for the longest time, libertarians and people that are actually on the anti-war left, not the warmongering left that goes along with the propaganda that wants us to be involved in Ukraine, but the actual people that pay attention. We've been pointing fingers at USAID for years. You know, basically explaining how it's just a CIA front. Now you see, officially, USAID is the principal U.S. agency to extend assistance to countries recovering from disaster, trying to escape poverty, and engaging in democratic reforms. Now, that comes from the USAID website. But I believe USAID is nothing more than a CIA front that acts as a humanitarian organization to shield covert operations and also utilize soft power in an attempt to influence foreign nations. And it's not because our government really believes in freedom and fair elections, but because the elites and large multinational corporations and the military industrial complex want to control the world's resources and all of the militaries around the world. It's a dual purpose agency, basically meaning that, yes, they're going to provide foreign assistance, but also only to advance United States foreign policy. And again, not because it's in the interest of the United States people, but it's because it's in the interest of the people that own our government. So let's get into the article, and then I'll start talking about some of the history of USAID that a lot of people might not be familiar with. So here's the headline from a Business Insider article. There's a ton of articles. They're all generally the same. You pretty much got the right pointing out a lot of the ridiculous spending and programs that they were funding, and then you got the left talking about how if they cut off the aid, all these people are going to suffer and die, and all the typical, virtue signaling that you see from them. They want to let you know how altruistic they are, and you know they want to exhibit their egalitarian principles. But we'll just get into the article here. So USAID is on Trump and Musk's cost-cutting list. Here's where the foreign aid agency spends its money. So let's scroll down here. It says proposed cuts to the U.S. Agency for International Development could reduce assistance to Ukraine, Jordan, and Ethiopia. Data for fiscal year 2024 shows that USA distributed nearly $32.5 billion in aid that year, much of it to Africa and the Middle East. On Tuesday evening, USAID staff received an email saying that starting Friday, all USAID direct hire personnel will be placed on administrative leave globally, with the exception of designated personnel responsible for mission-critical functions, core leadership, and specially designated programs. The email added that essential staff would be notified on Thursday afternoon and that the agency would begin moving international staff back to the U.S. within 30 days. The U.S. spends more on humanitarian aid than other countries by wide margins, though foreign aid spending is under 1% of the federal budget. The U.S. provides some amount of aid to most countries, including nearly every country in Africa and Asia. Many polls have found a majority of Americans believe the U.S. is spending too much on foreign aid, including for Ukraine. Yeah, I'd say that's an understatement. We're spending way too much money on foreign aid, especially when we have people in this country that we can't even take care of. And not that I'm advocating for socialist-style programs or government, but if we're not going to take care of American citizens, we definitely don't need to be taking of citizens in other countries. So here's a chart for the top 10 countries by USAID spending. So Ukraine leads the list. Obviously, we gotta keep that military industrial complex funded, so that way we can line the pockets of all those big military contractors and corrupt foreign officials in Ukraine and destabilize the region around Russia. We got Jordan up there because we need Jordan's assistance because they need to take in a lot of those Syrian refugees so we can expand Israel's borders. Ethiopia, Congo, South Sudan, Somalia, because we're fighting those Chinese for power because we want to get those resources that are in those countries. You know, they got Congo on here. That's a interesting history in itself. Just if you're familiar with Patrice Lumumba, he was a guy that was democratically elected there in I think it was like 1959 or 1960, and he wanted to nationalize the resources for the Congolese people. Well, they were basically occupied by Belgium at the time. So the CIA assisted Belgium with leading a coup against Patrice Lumumba, and they took him and a couple of his, like assistant officers or whatever they were, like administrators within his regime, and they beat them to death and then chopped their bodies up and then burned their bodies with acid, and there's like no remains of them left. I read this book called Blowback about a year ago, and it really delved into the history of CIA intervention and these foreign coups and stuff, from Guatemala to Iran and Indonesia, just all this stuff that's been going on for years. But anyway, back to the article. So in 2024, the U.S. donated over $5.4 billion in aid to Ukraine through USAID, most of which was through macroeconomic support to assist in its war with Russia and to make sure that we buy all those weapons and try to get Ukraine into NATO, because NATO countries have an obligation to spend X amount of their budget to buy weapons from NATO weapons manufacturers. The agency gave over $1.23 billion to Jordan last year, mostly through a cash transfer to the government in exchange for the country cooperating with U.S. interests, such as providing intelligence support and housing Syrian refugees. USAID also gave slightly over $1.2 billion to Ethiopia, and nearly that amount to Congo amid continued conflict, climate shocks, and food shortages. Other countries that received hundreds of millions of dollars from the agency included South Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, Sudan, and Yemen. Yeah, Yemen, we gotta help out with that civil war going on down there between the Saudis and the Yemen, I think they're the Houthi rebels. So of the $32.5 billion in spending, about one quarter went to humanitarian purposes, while another quarter went to health and population. The agency allocated about $7 billion to governance and another $3.6 billion to administrative cost. It devoted over $2.3 billion to fighting AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria globally, about $290 million to making vaccines and immunization more widespread, and nearly $188 million to international development and capital investment. USAID, founded in 1961 during the Cold War, had three top partners in 2024: the World Bank Group, which received $4 billion, the World Food Program, which received $3.4 billion, and the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, which received $2.3 billion. About one quarter of USAID funding came from the Economic Support Fund, while $7.4 billion came from the State Department and global health programs. Democrats and Republicans have been split on USAID standing, while many Democrats say cutting USAID spending could have widespread negative impacts on millions of people in war-torn or developing countries and could cost Americans thousands of jobs. Okay, first of all, government jobs are not even real jobs. They're basically a drain on the real economy. People that you need to understand that. People need to have a basic understanding that in order for the government to create jobs, they have to extract wealth through the taxation of the free market economy to create those jobs, because the government cannot create money. Money is basically just a measurement of wealth, and it's extracted from the real economy in order to create government services and jobs. So it's not those jobs are not real jobs. And If you're working for a private organization and you're getting money through subsidies, then you're basically able to use the government to extort money from other people that are productive and give it to you, and you are operating in a non-productive capacity. But anyway, I digress. Back to the article. Republicans argue U.S. aid spending is often wasteful and not in the U.S.'s best interest. Yeah, and if you saw Marco Rubio was doing an interview, and he was basically only upset about the charitable angle of U.S. aid. You know, that's the thing. You're not going to hear these Republicans really talking down about, you know, destabilizing these countries and coups and everything else, because they see that as necessary. Donald Trump and Elon Musk have attacked U.S. aid and other foreign aid programs over the past few weeks. Musk called USAID a criminal organization in a post on X, while Trump told reporters on Sunday that USAID was run by a bunch of radical lunatics. And we'll talk about one of those lunatics here in just a second. I'll get to that. So some legal analysts and Democratic politicians have argued that only an act of Congress can shut down an independent agency like USAID, though Trump and Musk have said there's a fraud in USAID. Some experts have pushed back on these claims. We don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk, and that's going to become real clear, Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland said at a press conference Monday outside the USAID headquarters. Well, of course, Jamie Raskin's upset because he's a representative of Maryland, which a lot of these NGOs and other groups that are parasitic and feed off that big federal money, they're all operating out of Maryland and Virginia and all these other places. That's where they all have their headquarters, because they want to be real close to D.C. so they can be there and lobby and try to get their hands on as much money as possible. He says, this illegal, unconstitutional interference with congressional power is threatening lives all over the world. But see, I would argue that U.S. aid in itself is an unconstitutional program. You know, the Constitution in Section 1, Article 8 lays out exactly what Congress can do. And it's very specific. There's just a few things that Congress can do, and providing humanitarian aid to foreign nations is not one of them. Now, see, what they've done is they've taken the necessary and proper clause, and that's become the elastic clause. But basically, they say that gives Congress the authority to do anything necessary in order to carry out their targeted objectives. But the only thing it gives them the power to do is what's necessary and proper to execute specifically what the powers granted to them in the Constitution. If it wasn't specific powers, then they wouldn't have laid out the specific things in Section 1, Article 8 that basically restrain their power. It would just say, well, the U.S. Congress can do whatever it needs to do. That's why James Madison said that their powers were few and defined. That was in one of the Federalist Papers, where James Madison, who was basically one of the main writers of the Constitution, and he said, yes, few and defined. Not they can do whatever's necessary and proper for them to do whatever they want. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio was named USAID's acting director. And that's not any better. That guy's a neocon. On Monday, and has advocated for foreign assistance agencies to be more transparent about how aid is being implemented. Rubio said the Trump administration was reviewing each program to see if it makes the U.S. safer, stronger, and more prosperous. At the start of Trump's presidency, his administration froze billions in humanitarian aid, saying that many foreign assistance programs promoted liberal agendas or cost the U.S. unnecessarily large amounts. And again, that's what we're looking at. So they're more concerned about the program promoting liberal agendas. But what about the coups? What about the regime change? Funding Wuhan labs? Building irrigation systems in Afghanistan to facilitate the growing of poppy fields? Setting up fake Twitter-style social media accounts in Cuba that initially promoted sports and weather and other social issues, and then the algorithm starts promoting anti-government propaganda. These are just some of the things that USAID has been involved in. Now, of course, these claims are denied by USAID, and they do have plausible deniability. And they do have plausible deniability because they don't operate in a direct way. They take their money and their funding and they give it to these NGOs, these non governmental organizations like the Open Society Foundations, the National Endowment for Democracy. There's a bunch of them. There's the Freedom House. There's the Trace Foundation. They create independent media sites that they can use to spread propaganda in all these other countries. You know, kind of like when they had the CIA got caught doing Operation Mockingbird, where they were funding mainstream journalists in all the countries and having them put out articles that, you know, would help influence or, you know, get the public interest to go the direction they wanted. Like when they wanted to overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, they were using news articles and pamphlets and all these things to get the people stirred up. And there's Freedom House, the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican Institute. These are all non-governmental organizations that get funding from USAID. And, you know, the Open Society Foundations, that in itself is basically just a big parent organization of a bunch of NGOs. And it's ran by this guy right here, George Soros. Now, George Soros is traditionally your, you know, right-wing conservative boogeyman, and for good reason. I think the guy's corrupt as it gets, and he uses the Open Society Foundation to fund groups like the Center for American Progress, Media Matters, and there's dozens of them, and he's able to channel this money into different groups. I mean, they've got, you know, he's got funds here to get, you know, extremely liberal district attorneys and prosecutors, you know, put into office, and he can enact things that he wants. And in other countries, he gets government officials put into place so he can try to destabilize the region, make money off of, you know, currency devaluations, or, you know, whatever the angle is that he wants to work. But the dude's, you know, super corrupt. I mean, super smart guy, very smart guy, very brilliant. You know, he's made a lot of money running hedge funds, and I'm not anti people making money, but what I am against is people using the government to help facilitate themselves and facilitate their groups and making money through manipulating markets and manipulating the world. It's corrupt. And you don't hear a lot of people pointing out that Trump's pick for Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, he actually works very close with George Soros. He worked for the Soros Management Fund in the early 90s, left, started his own fund, and then came back, worked with Soros again for a while. So, you know, like I've said, you got to keep an eye on Trump and these people he's bringing in. Do I think that doing these cuts to USAID is good? Absolutely. I think we need to take a chainsaw to the federal government, kind of like Javier Milei. But, you know, pay attention to these people that are coming in, because I'm not necessarily buying it. You know, Marco Rubio is not going to be my guy that I would want to put in charge of USAID and the State Department. But, you know, you can go back and we've got the color revolutions of the 2000s. This is from the Georgian rose revolutions. They were called the color revolutions because each one kind of had a different name to it. So you had the Georgia Rose Revolution in 2003. Then here was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004. Yeah, imagine that. We were pushing for regime change and control of the elections in Ukraine back in 2004. And you had the Saffron Revolution in Myanmar. That was, you know, trying to cause destabilization just outside of along China's borders. The Crimson Revolution in Tibet. You had the Green Revolution in Iran in 2009. And there were ties from USAID to all of these NGOs basically leading the way, you know, and they did it through using social media and all the things that were kind of being advanced at the time. And the National Endowment for Democracy, they've been tied into meddling in elections in Bulgaria in 1990, Albania in 1991, failed coup attempts in Venezuela against Hugo Chavez back in 2002. Basically, anywhere that you have opposition to American foreign policy, you will find USAID supporting NGOs to try to get their way. Like go back to that Rose Revolution here in Georgia, USAID spent $1.5 million on modernizing their voting system and hired 3,000 of the election observers, to make sure that the elections were fair. And when we say fair, we mean go the way that we want them to go. Like when the National Endowment for Democracy got involved in the Bulgarian elections, it was because, a communist won. Heaven forbid. We thought for sure that after the fall of the Berlin Wall that, communism was never going to win an election again. And I'm not an advocate for communism, but if that's what those countries want to do, then let them do it and leave them alone. And to me, when those systems fail, because they will, because the only true system that I think that will be successful in promoting freedom is a free market capitalist society, which we do not have here in America, but gets all the blame. But you need free market capitalism. So if other countries want to be communist, let them be communist. And when they collapse and fail, that's how you win. You don't win an argument by shutting down your opponent and not allowing them to talk or letting them to do their thing. You do it by letting them fail. Let those ideas fail. Shoot down those ideas, through discourse and debate. You don't do it by shutting them down and trying to coup them and not allow them to succeed. Now, Trump said that USAID was run by a bunch of radicals. So he is right about that. And the most recent head of USAID is this woman right here, Samantha Power. Now, Samantha Power is one of these unelected bureaucrats that's been in government for years. And, I don't know if she is just completely corrupt or evil, or if she's just a do-gooder that thinks she knows better than everybody else and thinks she should control the world, influence the world, mold the world to how she believes it should be ran. And that's kind of what I'm more prone to thinking. I don't necessarily think a lot of these people see themselves as evil, but I do think they want to control you because they think they're smarter than you, and they think they need to make the decisions on how the world should be ran instead of letting people make decisions for themselves. But let's talk about Samantha Power. So Samantha Power went to Yale, where she was a member of the Aurelian Honor Society, which is a secret society, part of the Ancient Eight, which includes the Skull and Bone Society, also at Yale, which was a Bush Senior and Junior organization. And it's basically, that's what the Aurelian Honor Society is. It's basically like Skull and Bones for women. It's really just it's that fraternity sorority system, but on like the kind of like the darker levels, the more well-connected, super elite people are at these ones. And that's where they make these relationships to go on to get these jobs and get put into positions of power. And, they're kind of getting groomed to be brought into this, global elite organization. So she then goes on to work at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which that's a globalist think tank. It's almost like the NGOs, but it's it's where a bunch of people get together and they talk about how they can create world government. It's like the Council on Foreign Relations, basically, these global think tanks. And after working at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, she worked as a war correspondent in 93 to 96, covering the Yugoslav wars, all that mess that Clinton was involved in, and Serbs and Croatia. And that's that's a pretty complicated history. It's very there's like 3 or 4 different sides. They're all involved, but she was there making sure that she was spreading the propaganda how that was to be basically portrayed through the Western media. She won a Pulitzer Prize for her book, A Problem from Hell: America in the Age of Genocide, which her book was used to create the United Nations Doctrine of the Responsibility to Protect, further trying to establish the United States as the world police and develop world government. See, the only place that the United States has a responsibility to protect is the United States. Now, we can advocate for peace, and if people ask us to, help moderate or broker a deal and some type of negotiation that is in the benefit of everybody and it's peaceful and it's not destructive, like that's good. You want to see that. I'm not saying we shouldn't not have influence, but we don't need to intervene directly, like what's going on with Trump and Gaza right now. Now, if the Palestinians and the Israelis say, hey, look, we would like a moderator to come in here, we would like somebody to come in here and help us, come up with a solution, then we could say, hey, look, here, we'll offer you all advice, basically be consultant, but we're not going to get involved. Okay, this is on you guys to work out, and hopefully we can come up with a good solution. But she thinks that we need to be involved in everybody's business, everybody's country, that America has some duty to be involved. And then they say people like libertarians that don't agree with that philosophy were isolationist. Well, I don't agree with that. I would say it's more isolationist to constantly be interfering in other countries, internal affairs, causing destabilization, being involved in their wars, killing people, and then other countries resent us and reject us and don't have very much respect for us on the global stage. It would be better for people to respect us because they admire us. It would be better for them to respect us because they admire us, not out of fear that we're going to drop bombs on them and kill all their families. Samantha Power also, excuse me. Samantha Power also worked for Obama as a foreign policy advisor when he was in the Senate and after he took over as the president. She was actually one of the people that was influential in persuading him to support the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya. That was when Hillary Clinton, after we toppled Gaddafi and Gaddafi died, that's when Hillary went on to have this little
So,
thing to
that
say.
is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
So that's Hillary Clinton's reaction to right after Muammar Gaddafi was killed. The time when we helped radical Islamists topple a foreign nation. Not that we've got a history of helping out radical Islamists, except for Afghanistan and Syria and Libya, and the list goes on. But that people like Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power, they, to them it's all just a game. That's what Hillary Clinton reacts to somebody dying. Whether you like the guy or not. I don't take pleasure in the fact that other people die, or the fact that when guys go to war, they have to kill people, and it's terrible. But somebody like Hillary Clinton can sit around and laugh about that. I don't have a lot of respect for somebody like that, especially somebody that never served or picked up a weapon in her life, or at least that we know about as far as picking up weapons. Who knows what she's been involved in. But yeah, so when Samantha Power was appointed to Obama's National Security Council, she had a lot of support from Lindsey Graham and John McCain, if you can believe that, those big neocon Republicans. And then while she was working there, while she was working for Obama, she met this guy, Cass Sunstein, which I'll talk about him in just a second. But Obama then promoted her in his second term to be ambassador to the United Nations, which of course again makes sense. She's somebody that wants to create world government and the U.S. to have a leading role in it. But after the Obama administration, she worked at the faculty at Harvard, brainwashing all of the up and coming ambitious young men and women with her misguided globalist worldviews so they can go on and spread all of that, distorted thoughts. And then she took over USAID in January 2021. And that's when Joe Biden moved the head of the USAID to a seat on the National Security Council, primarily because that's exactly what they do. They're more about U.S. security and foreign policy than they are humanitarian aid, despite what all of the left-wing media news articles have told you this past week. USAID is not primarily there to function as a humanitarian assistance organization. They are there to facilitate CIA operations in foreign countries. Now, let's talk about Cass Sunstein. So, funny enough, I learned about Cass Sunstein and Samantha Power years ago when Glenn Beck had his program on Fox News. Now, regardless of what you think about Glenn Beck, he has provided lots of good information over the years, just as Tucker Carlson has. Now, I'm not saying that I like either one of those guys. I disagree with them on certain issues, just as I agree with many other people. But Glenn Beck's program, when it was on Fox News, was a great show that was actually covering some really important issues. A couple of them being pointing out that people like Samantha Power and Cass Sunstein were working within our government. So this guy, Cass Sunstein, he has spent most of his adult life as an academic and writer. He's one of the intelligentsia class. He believes he knows what's best for you. The kind of control freak that wants to manipulate you because it's for your own good. He authored a book called Nudge with this other guy, Richard Thaler. And in the book Nudge, he talks about how to avoid being authoritarian by nudging people into making the right decision based on what he thinks you need to be doing. And he even came up with this concept called libertarian paternalism. And what he means by libertarian paternalism is it's libertarian because in the end, the individual is the one making the choice, or they feel like they've made the choice based on their own decision to, not that they were manipulated by it, but basically they were guided to it by the benevolent bureaucrat that is smarter than you. And that's when he calls themselves the choice architects. So choice architects are basically, people that come up with this, good idea or policy, and we can kind of nudge you and direct you into the direction that you need to go. And that's pretty much anti my entire thinking. Like, I believe people need to be free to make their decisions. And if they make mistakes, they make mistakes. But you know what? You don't know what's right for the other person. You can have your ideas, but at the end of the day, just because you think something is the right way to do it, that doesn't make it so. And people need to be free to make their own decisions and make their own mistakes. And that's how it works. We don't need this nanny state that protects people from the cradle to the grave. Do I agree? Are there a lot of ignorant people out there that probably wouldn't survive? Yeah, that's probably accurate. There's probably a lot of people that couldn't get by without government assistance. But that's exactly what should happen. They shouldn't get by. They shouldn't reproduce. If people can't get by on their own, why do we want to drag them along? I'm not saying that you round them up and do anything to harm them, but you also don't carry them along and basically make them a burden onto the people that can be productive, the people that can take care of themselves. Don't subject others to being weighed down by the weight of people that can't take care of themselves, that's ridiculous. And if Cass Sunstein's nudging doesn't work to get you to do the things that he thinks you can do, then he advocates for, you know, maybe pushing regulation or, you know, some type of government control or restriction. You know, if say you lived in New York when Bloomberg was in office and you wanted to drink a large soda, but, you know, we all know soda's bad for you, which it is. I don't drink very much soda, but there's people that want to drink soda. And if they want to drink soda, then let them make that decision. And if they want to drink an 80-ounce soda, let them make that decision. But Bloomberg wanted to restrict the size and amount of soda that businesses were able to sell to people. So that's a perfect example of a Cass Sunstein nudge. You know, we know soda's bad. You're fat. You shouldn't be able to drink it. Hey, guess what? If you want to be fat, man. You know, I also don't think that our healthcare system should take care of you. And that's the argument that they try to make, which is one of the problems of central authority and government being involved in those systems. Because people that say they want government healthcare, so you want the government to regulate because that's what you're opening the door to. Because then they can say, oh, well, if we're going to provide healthcare for you, you know, we can't have a bunch of fat people drinking soda. You know, they'll start coming up with more intrusive restrictions on your personal life. But so this Cass Sunstein guy, he went on to become the head of White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs during Obama's first administration. I think they called him the information czar at the time, which I've never understood why people within our government get that title, czar. And it's not just Democratic administrations. I've heard it in Republican administrations as well. But it's like czar. That's very just comes off as very Russian and, you know, communistic. I don't like it. I'd get rid of it. Doesn't sound good, but, you know, whatever. So similar. This is what I find interesting. So his wife Samantha Power ran USAID, but similar to USAID, Sunstein has also advocated using NGOs to advance government objectives without having direct links. He wrote this paper titled Conspiracy Theorist, and he co-authored them with this other guy, Adrian Vermeule. And they're both constitutional law professors, constitutional like legal scholars. And you know, it's funny because I've always found people like this. I don't think that they're constitutional scholars because they love the Constitution. I feel like they want to learn about the Constitution so they can figure out how to manipulate it. They want to find, you know, that legalese, the wording manipulation that they can use to be able to use the government for whatever, kind of like I talked about earlier, the necessary and proper clause, how that's come to mean that the government can do whatever they determine to be necessary and proper. But that's why I think people like Cass Sunstein really want to know about the Constitution. So, but anyway, in this paper, they go on to talk about how the government should counter conspiracy theories. And, you know, just so we're clear, you know, conspiracy theories are basically anything that the government says doesn't fit the official narrative. He even goes on to point out that, you know, one of the examples they use in the paper is, you know, people that are promoting the idea that our government had any complicity in 9/11. Yeah, you know, so anybody that's, you know, even toying with the idea that our government had anything to do with 9/11 or, you know, the Hunter Biden laptop or the Gulf of Tonkin resolution or the CIA selling drugs, you know, anybody that's talking about any of those conspiracy theories, you know, we need to figure out a way to basically shut them up. But he advocates having government agents infiltrate online social networks or even real space groups to raise doubts and challenge those conspiracy theories. You know, like having FBI agents infiltrate the Proud Boys and the groups at the January 6th protest. or maybe having, maybe getting funding to Black Lives Matter so we can organize these protests, things like that. Good things that NGOs do. But so he wants to have the government infiltrate groups to counter conspiracy theories. And he comes up with, they had like 5 steps in there. And one of the steps was to outright ban conspiracy theories. The government can be the arbiter of truth. The government can tell you what's true and what's not. A ministry of truth, as George Orwell might say. Step 2 could be to impose taxes or fines on anyone disseminating conspiracy theories. So maybe if banning conspiracy theories seemed too authoritarian, they would, do it in a light way to impose a tax or a fine on you for spreading misinformation. He says the government could engage in counter speech to discredit those theories. Maybe pay a journalist to put out an article that counters anything that you've brought forth. Like when they were talking about some of the chemical weapons labs in Ukraine, and they were concerned about Russia getting them. And they put out this whole thing about how that's a conspiracy theory. There were no labs in Ukraine and nothing that we were involved in. But then the very next week, Victoria Nuland, she's another one of these big government interventionists. You can look her up too. But Victoria Nuland was in a hearing, and she was talking about the biological weapons labs in the Ukraine that we needed to protect. So if it was a conspiracy theory, why was Victoria Nuland on trial talking about why we needed to protect those laboratories? So then he goes on to say the government could hire private parties to engage in counter speech, making the case that non-government organizations should be recruited, and the government can, and I quote, the government can supply these independent experts with information and perhaps prod them into action from behind the scenes. The authors warn that too close a connection will be self-defeating if it is exposed. So it will be self-defeating if it is exposed. So if the government is found out to be funding this disinformation, I say it's disinformation, they say it's the narrative they want to promote, but the government is basically trying to control the narrative. And they recognize that if you know that the government is the ones spreading this information, then that doesn't look good for the government to be the ones that are promoting it. He goes on in the paper to argue that the practice of enlisting NGOs might ensure that credible independent experts offer the rebuttal rather than government officials themselves. There is a trade-off between credibility and control, however. The price of credibility is that government cannot be seen to control the independent experts. And that's exactly why agencies like USAID channel the money through various NGOs. They have to create these layers of separation so that way they don't lose that credibility. If there's a free independent media that we started in Burma that's spreading anti-Chinese propaganda or trying to get a certain viewpoint across, we don't want that to be linked to the United States government. We're just a humanitarian organization. This is what this is the way I see USAID thinking to themselves. It says we're just a humanitarian organization. We have nothing to do with destabilizing countries or overthrowing governments that don't bend the knee to the United States empire. So that's why they pay journalists and other news organizations to be the gatekeepers of truth. But again, it's nothing new. Operation Mockingbird started in the 60s and it never went away. And so that's about all I have to say about USAID. But again, this is all just scratching the surface. It really is, and that's kind of what's scary. And so here's some of the people. You'll get in discussions with people and you'll say like, oh, they're trying to do this and they're trying to do that, and they're saying, who is they? Who is they? They act like it's and it's like, I don't know, man. I'm talking about the general they. people in general that are within the government trying to manipulate the world and control the world's resources. And really, they all just work for the elites. They're just working for the people that are wealthy enough to buy all the influence and buy all the politicians. And, they have these, like I said, they've got these academics that think they're smarter than you. And so Cass Sunstein and Samantha Power, I don't necessarily know that they're evil. They probably think they're doing good things. But, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the people that want to control them, they're smart enough to know, like, oh, this guy's really smart. He's got a little bit of an ego to him. Let's give him a little bit of influence and a little bit of power. And the next thing you know, you got these global think tanks. Well, here you go, people. Anybody that wants to know who they are, here they are. Cass Sunstein and Samantha Power. Just two of them. But there's thousands of these people. And again, they're always regarded as like really good people. And for the most part, they probably are. They're probably really, like, obviously they're very smart. They've got, Yale, Harvard, like all these like highly credentialed, educational institutions. And I'm not trying to say they're clearly not dumb. But I think they're misguided. And that's the problem. We got a bunch of misguided people that are basically leading us to destruction, whether they realize it or not. So thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe. Any support I can get would help.